Hello everyone, I'm Lao Gao. In 2009, Disney released a very famous animated film called Up. Most people have seen it. It's about an old man who, to fulfill his late wife's dream, ties balloons to his house and flies to Paradise Falls. The story is touching, and I personally like it. Of course, it's an animated film, so many might think this could never happen in real life. But actually, that's not the case. Something similar did happen. So today, let's talk about a famous case from Japan. The balloon prayer uncle incident. What happened? This took place 33 years ago, on October 23, 1992. A 52-year-old Japanese man piloted his homemade helium balloon, named the Fantasy, or Dream, from Lake Biwa, Japan's largest freshwater lake. With the wind, he headed east, planning to cross the Pacific to the United States. However, he lost contact during the journey and has been missing ever since. It's been 33 years, and no one has found him. Later, Japanese media dubbed him the Balloon Prayer Uncle, a legendary figure in Japan. The balloon uncle's real name was Kaga Suzuki, born 1940 in Tokyo, Japan, and he worked as a piano tuner. His whole family was in the piano tuning business, so under the influence of the family trade, he studied music from a young age. For high school, he attended the affiliated school of Japan's National University of Fine Arts and Music. After graduating from high school, he joined Yamaha, the famous Japanese company, and worked as a piano tuner. After working there for a while, he struck out on his own and became an independent professional tuner. He worked as a tuner for 20 years, and by the time he was 44, it was right during Japan's period of rapid economic growth. This was what we call the Japanese bubble economy period. So, he also started to venture into business and opened a company that produced music teaching materials. Later, in 1986, he even opened a music salon in Ginza, and at the same time ran a mahjong parlor, a cafe, a bar, and a restaurant. Basically, everything made money back then, so he did it all. But honestly, he started a bit late, because just 3 years later, in 1989, the Japanese economy hit a turning point. This also became a turning point in his own life, as all his businesses began to decline, and the biggest change in his life happened in 1989. When he was 49, there was an expo held in Yokohama, Japan. He invested a huge sum of money to rent a booth there, hoping to make a big profit. But in the end, very few people came to the expo, and maybe his booth's location wasn't ideal either, so he ended up losing quite a bit of money. Later, halfway through the expo, he even put on a homemade mascot costume and climbed up a tall tower in the expo venue. From there, he staged a strong protest against the expo organizers. It's said that he protested on top of the tower for more than 7 hours. The police also came and kept trying to talk him down from below. Eventually, they persuaded him to come down and gave him a stern warning and some serious criticism, then let him go. From his actions, you can tell that he must have lost a lot of money on this, otherwise he wouldn't have been so outraged. Sure enough, just a year later, in 1990, all the businesses under his company went bankrupt. At that time, he was saddled with 500 million yen in debt. In 1990, the exchange rate between the yen and the US dollar was almost the same as it is now. 500 million yen was about 3 million US dollars. But if you take into account 30 years of inflation, if you consider purchasing power, 500 million yen back then would be roughly equivalent to about 8 million US dollars today, so it was a pretty huge amount. This was actually one of the main reasons he wanted to cross the Pacific in a balloon. He hoped that by attracting a lot of attention with this balloon adventure, he might be able to pay off his debt. But when his company had just gone bankrupt, he didn't immediately think of doing something so extreme. He tried his hand at a few other ventures, but since the overall environment was so bad, everything he tried was really difficult, and none of those things worked out either. Later on, inspired by a friend, he suddenly came up with this idea. If he could cross the Pacific in a balloon, maybe he could become the center of attention worldwide. In that case, paying off that 500 million yen debt might not be such a big problem anymore, and that's how the idea came about. Later, in 1992, he actually crossed the Pacific by balloon, but that attempt in 1992 wasn't his first try at crossing the Pacific. Before that, he did a test flight in April of 1992. He set off from the Tama River in Tokyo, with his target destination set as Kujikuri Beach in Chiba Prefecture. The distance was about 100 kilometers. He wanted to try flying 100 kilometers first. At the beginning, the flight reportedly went very smoothly. His balloon quickly ascended to 5,600 meters. Oh, by the way, I should mention that both the balloon and the basket underneath were made by him personally. The whole setup looked a bit like a hot air balloon, but it wasn't a hot air balloon. The balloon was filled entirely with helium. He named his balloon Craft the Fantasy. There were about 30 balloons in total, with 4 main balloons, each 6 meters in diameter, and the rest about 3 meters each. At the same time, he also placed 4 8-hour oxygen tanks in the basket. For this flight, he estimated it would take 40 hours to cross the Pacific, so he only brought 4 8-hour oxygen tanks, a week's worth of food, as well as a latitude and longitude instrument, an altimeter, a speedometer, and a maritime distress signal device which, if a maritime accident occurred, could send out a distress signal. The radar could then quickly pinpoint his location. This kind of device is usually installed on ships or on Now, they're also installed on drones, as well as parachutes and radar reflectors. A radar reflector is a multifaceted device that can reflect radar signals from all angles. With such a device, no matter where it falls, radar can easily locate it so they can find you. It's used quite a lot in the military and can be used for jamming signals, right? For example, if you don't want others to know where you are, you can scatter a bunch of these things, and then they won't know which one is actually you, kind of like a shadow clone. He also brought a phone. Back in 1992, cell phones weren't as convenient as they are now. Those big brick phones were the main thing. So he brought a phone about that size, and also brought a map. On top of that, he wore a ski suit, because it's extremely cold at high altitudes. He wore several layers of ski clothing, and it said that they tested it in a freezer to make sure it could withstand temperatures as low as -60 degrees Celsius. All of this gear, plus the cost of making the gasoline, reportedly added up to 15 million yen, which is about $100,000 US. You can see he was really serious about this. It wasn't like he just tied some balloons together and wanted to fly away on a whim. Of course, his preparations weren't just about the equipment, he also prepared himself personally. Before the flight, he trained himself to endure hunger, because if he ended up stranded at sea, it might be a long time before anyone came to rescue him. He only had enough food for about a week, and once that was gone, there wouldn't be any more. So, to last longer, he needed to build up his endurance and ability to withstand hunger. He practiced going without food, and at the same time, this helped him lose some weight, which might allow him to fly farther. In short, he made all kinds of preparations. But no matter how much he prepared, this thing itself was unpowered, so he could only go wherever the wind took him. As for where he would land, he basically had to rely on weather forecasts to make a guess. It was a very dangerous setup. On his first test flight, the balloons lifted him up to 5,600 meters, that's already above the clouds. After flying at that altitude for a while, several of the balloons quickly burst, causing him to drop rapidly. In the end, he crashed onto the roof of a house. Fortunately, a few balloons didn't burst, so his descent wasn't that fast. He himself wasn't injured, but he did damage someone else's house. Later, when the police arrived, they arrested him. In the end, he didn't pay any compensation for the damage to the house. During this test, he flew a distance of 24 kilometers. He originally wanted to fly 100 kilometers, but didn't succeed. About a month later, he got married. But this wasn't his first marriage, it was his third. He married a Japanese pianist, and she wasn't in her first marriage either. She had 3 daughters. It said that the two of them had known each other since childhood and reunited in middle age, so they decided to spend their lives together. That's the situation. Half a year after getting married, on November 23, 1992, he prepared for his second test flight, which took place at Lake Biwa. This kind of flight, in principle, was not allowed by the police. Not only was it dangerous for him, but also for the people around him. For example, the first time, he crashed into a residential house. Fortunately, no one was hurt, but if he had crashed into a crowd or hit somewhere else, the consequences could have been much worse. So the police did not allow him to do this kind of flight. However, after talking with the police, I think he agreed to tie a rope to the aircraft during the flight. The police even sent people to watch him to prevent any dangerous actions, and he did indeed tie the rope. That day, he also invited some media and sponsors, saying, "Look at what my invention can do, maybe it'll attract more people to invest." When the test flight began, the thing slowly started to float up. After it took off, he cut the rope at high altitude and just flew away. And so the real challenge began. As I mentioned earlier, the police didn't allow it, so he used this method to get around their restrictions. Once I'm in the air, you can't control me anymore. As a result, the balloon really did carry him up into the sky, and he gradually disappeared from sight and drifted away. After he took off, the media tried to contact him because he had brought a phone, and the media knew his number. They called him, and every hour he would also proactively contact his family and the media, constantly letting everyone know he was safe, saying things like, "I'm about to fly over such and such place." He would say things like, "I'm at such and such location now," and that everything was going smoothly. This continued until the next morning, when he contacted his family again and said, "I can see the morning sunlight, it's beautiful." After that, there was no more contact. Maybe he had flown out of range, since his phone wasn't a satellite phone and couldn't get a signal everywhere. If he flew over the ocean, there would be no signal. So later, his family waited for news from him, because according to his original plan, he said he would reach the United States in 40 hours. His plan was actually like this. He intended for the balloon to carry him up to an altitude of 10,000 meters. That would take him into the stratosphere. The stratosphere, you know, has winds that blow from west to east all year round. He thought he could use these winds to carry him all the way to the United States. But in reality, those winds aren't actually that strong. From Lake Biwa to the United States, he planned to land somewhere around San Francisco, which is a straight line distance of over 8,000 kilometers. Taking into account that he might not fly in a straight line, the actual flight distance could reach 12,000 kilometers. Even if it were just over 8,000 kilometers, he wanted to reach the US in 4 hours, which would require a speed of over 200 kilometers per hour. But the average wind speed in the stratosphere is only about 50 to 150 kilometers per hour, so his original plan was unrealistic from the start. There's another very unrealistic aspect. His helium balloon simply couldn't take him up to 10,000 meters altitude, because he wasn't using any special kind of weather balloon. Instead, he bought a relatively large regular balloon from a company. With this kind of balloon, as the altitude increases, the air pressure drops and the air density decreases, so the balloon expands and eventually bursts. Usually, these balloons start to burst at around 4 to 5,000 meters. During his first test flight, the balloon also began to burst at just over 5,000 meters, and he ended up plummeting rapidly onto someone else's house. So, according to the design, this balloon could only reach a maximum of just over 5,000 meters before it would stop ascending. It simply couldn't go any higher. If it always stays below 5,000 meters, it can't really be considered as having fully entered the stratosphere, and its speed would probably be even lower. So, from a design perspective, this challenge was basically an impossible task from the start. And the facts prove this point. When he was calling down from the balloon, he even said, "Why does it feel so much slower than I expected?" Then, the next morning, after telling his family that the sunrise was beautiful, he lost contact with them for the rest of the day. Japan's Coast Guard received the distress signal sent from his balloon. As I mentioned earlier, he brought a maritime rescue beacon with him, and it was this beacon that sent out the distress signal. This signal also included his coordinates, so the next morning after receiving the signal, the Maritime Self-Defense Force immediately dispatched a plane to the location where the signal was sent. As it turned out, they found that his airship was still flying, and he was even waving at the plane, looking to be in great spirits. According to the Coast Guard, they observed that his balloon was still steadily rising. So the Coast Guard believed that he probably wanted to keep flying. He also never indicated to the Coast Guard that he needed to be rescued or anything like that. As a result, after following him for 3 hours, the Coast Guard turned back, and there was no further news about him. Later, a week went by, and his family kept waiting. If he had arrived in the United States as planned, no matter how long it took, he would have contacted California immediately. But, as it turned out, there was no news at all. After a week, his family applied for a rescue operation, and Japan's Coast Guard immediately contacted the Canadian and American Coast Guards. They searched together at the places where he might have landed, but in the end, they couldn't find him. Neither he himself nor any wreckage from his airship or balloon was ever found, nothing at all. Even now, after all these years, there's still no news of him. As for his motivation for taking on this challenge, there were actually 2 reasons. One was that he wanted to pay off his debts. The other, which he publicly claimed as his main motivation, was that he wanted to use this event to promote the protection of the Ming Dynasty merchant ships. Mingxia is a natural phenomenon. In certain deserts or on some beaches around the world, when a wind blows, a humming sound occurs. This is called singing sand. Of course, it's not always a humming sound. Each desert produces a different noise. Some sound like dogs barking, some like thunder, and some even resemble music. Suzuki believed that this singing sand was a kind of music created by nature and needed to be protected, so these sandy areas shouldn't be damaged. He wanted to use this balloon flight to attract attention and then tell everyone to protect this phenomenon. But behind the scenes, of course, his biggest motivation was probably to pay off his debts. Although he disappeared, his debts did not vanish. Later, his wife ended up paying them off. He had only been married to his wife for half a year when he disappeared, leaving behind a debt of 500 million yen. His wife and their 3 daughters later organized some music events and gradually paid off the debt bit by bit. In the end, his wife remarried in 2016, since he had completely disappeared. She remarried, and in 2017, because, according to his wife, she always believed that one day he would come back. She also said that sometimes at night she would receive phone calls with no sound, and she always thought it might be him calling. So his wife still loved him very much. It's just that this man was a bit too crazy, of course. There was also a rumor that before he set off, he bought a huge life insurance policy. If he really did buy insurance, then maybe he was prepared to die. He knew this plan might not succeed, but he wanted to use his own death to pay off the debt. But I think, in cases like this, it's pretty unlikely that an insurance company would actually sell him a policy. So this is just a rumor, there's no evidence for it at all. This man is the most famous legendary figure in Japanese history to have suddenly disappeared. But balloon flights like this weren't just attempted by Balloon Uncle. Many people have tried this challenge throughout history. In fact, in recent years, there have still been people attempting it. I remember in 2017 and 2020, there were people who succeeded, but the flight distances were all very short. The first successful case in history was in 1982. 10 years before Balloon Uncle, there was an American truck driver named Larry Walters. He tied 4 or 5 balloons to a chair and flew sitting in that chair for 4 or 5 minutes, covering a distance of 24 kilometers and reaching a maximum altitude of 4,900 meters, which is really high. In the end, he landed safely. Actually, there was a bit of an accident involved in his flight. Larry had wanted to be a pilot since he was a kid, but because of his eyesight, he wasn't able to become one. So he started thinking about other ways to make his dream of flying come true. Later, in 1982, he suddenly discovered that military surplus stores sold weather balloons, so he bought 4 or 5 of them. Each balloon was 2.5 meters in diameter. He filled all 4 or 5 balloons with helium, tied them to a folding chair, a really simple chair, then secured the chair to his car to keep it from floating away. He also packed some snacks and beer, and brought a BB gun, then sat down in the chair. He called his friend over and tied a rope to the chair, asking his friend to slowly let out the rope so he could gradually rise up and float in the air. He just wanted to experience the feeling of floating, and that would be enough. But his friend ended up letting go of the rope completely, and he just floated away. He was terrified at the time, but luckily he had a BB gun with him, so he could shoot the balloons to control his altitude or even land. But apparently, at first, he was so scared that he didn't dare use the gun to shoot the balloons, afraid he'd fall. So he just kept flying with the balloons, all the way up to 4,900 meters. He started shooting the balloons, but ended up accidentally drifting into the airspace of Los Angeles Airport, where planes are constantly taking off and landing. A pilot spotted him and reported that there seemed to be a person flying in a chair in the sky. The control tower immediately used binoculars to spot this flying person and contacted the military to shoot him down. Sensing some kind of danger, he used his BB gun to shoot more balloons and slowly descended. By chance, he landed on a high-voltage power line, but fortunately, he wasn't electrocuted and wasn't injured. After landing, he was arrested by the police. Although his flight didn't actually cause any harm, still, he violated aviation laws by flying in a restricted area. So, the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration fined him $1,500, and that was the end of it. Later, many media outlets interviewed him and reported on the incident, and he became known as the pioneer of balloon chair flight. After that, many American adventurers started imitating him, making their own balloon chairs to fly. Some succeeded, some failed, and those who failed sometimes lost their lives. Even the successful ones usually didn't fly very far. Up to now, quite a few people have tried this kind of helium balloon flight, and the longest distance was achieved by someone in Japan, because when he was found, he was already 800 kilometers from the coastline, so the actual flight distance over 1,000 kilometers, but he didn't reach his goal of flying 12,000 kilometers and failed. In terms of flight distance, the Japanese attempt was definitely the farthest. The rest of the successful flights were a dozen or 20 kilometers, and even the farthest didn't exceed 50 kilometers. After Larry became famous, he started trying adventurous activities, but he never flew again. Even though his dream was to become a pilot, after experiencing flight, he never dared to fly again. In 1993, he committed suicide due to depression at the age of 44. The story of the balloon uncle I wanted to share with you today. I think that any challenge or dream shouldn't be pursued at the cost of your life. Maybe you can try, but that should be at the very end of your life, not when you still have so many things left to do, right? So, whatever you do, safety should always be your top priority, not just your own safety, but also the safety of those around you. Alright, that's all for today. See you next time. Bye-bye.